Greetings, everybody. Today, I am very tempted to present three manipulation techniques that appear very often in various forms of presentation, both in live argument and also in videos. Here, we are going to look at a very short segment in which the three things will become apparent. And before we go forward, I want to make the point that this video here is not a critique of the author of the original presentation, neither on critique on the subject matter of the whole presentation, which is about 30 minutes long, and analyzing that will take a very long time. Here we are going to spend time only on a very brief segment where these three techniques / methods appear, and I would like to let you know how to pay attention and to catch them in the future so that you can keep your mind straight on the argument instead. So without further ado, let's roll the tape.
Women are completely brainwashed by socialization. Even if they occupy a subordinate social position like a housewife, their positions still deserve respect. After all, hasn't domestic life traditionally made women better at being sensitive to people's needs and being able to create intimate relationships with particular people, which are just as valuable as traditional masculine skills? We've seen the flaws that come from upholding one standard of life as the goal of liberation. Service workers, for example, have been and continue to be undervalued because of the standard that real meaningful work comes from intellectual, not bodily work. We tell service workers that they should actually be grateful for increasing automation because we're actually liberating them from their menial jobs. Be free and crunch numbers on a computer instead.
So, the first one becomes evident. And this is, I don't know here if the author meant that as a manipulation technique. Very often people just do it as a normal mode of speech. But this is going from topic to topic into a rapid succession. So what happens? The listener has no time to evaluate each position and determine whether the position makes sense or not. And people, especially those who want to propagandize and manipulate, I don't think that is the case here, but people who want to propagandize and manipulate, they would state several times opinions on different subjects, each of which may require quite a time to think through to evaluate whether their position is correct or not. But by the time you start thinking about the first statement they made, they are already on the next statement, and then on the next and on the next, and as a result you are trying to catch up, but you can. And what happens? At some point the listeners give up trying to analyze what the speaker is saying, but instead they stop nodding because they try to make sense of what the speaker is saying and start giving the benefit of the doubt because just, for most people, no time to evaluate quickly whether what they say makes sense. So rapid switches from topic to topic, especially when they are not exactly dovetailed and each of them may allow for more time to discuss, is one of those techniques, and don't fall for it. Now for the next one, let's get back a little bit.
Of life as the goal of liberation. Service workers, for example, have been and continue to be undervalued because of the standard that real meaningful work.
So the next one, continuing being undervalued. What is that? In English, we have two ways of expression, active voice and passive voice. For example, here, if we were to use active voice about the service workers, we could have said, Corporation X pays its service workers, let's say $15 per hour, which is not enough. That would be an active voice. Corporation A does something. Instead, what we heard here is the passive voice, which is service workers have been underpaid or underappreciated and so on. What's the problem? The problem is that passive voice very often hides the actor who did the thing. For example, when you have in the United States politicians have messed up greatly, what do they say? They come and say, mistakes were made. Instead of saying, we were wrong in our policy, so please vote for somebody else. We're clearly incompetent. When you hear people talking in passive voice, sometimes they can do it because they don't know better, but sometimes, especially if we hear that from news anchors or from politicians, it is a clear manipulation technique where they're trying to withhold information and they're hoping that your mind will fill in the blanks. By the way, your mind, that same thing, your mind trying to fill in the blanks happens when people rapidly jump from topic to topic. They do not allow enough time, as we mentioned earlier, do not allow enough time for you to think it through. So you just fill in the blanks with what could probably make sense to have the listener justified in what they're saying. And here, when you have passive voice, too much information gets let out, and as a result, you don't know what happened and you try to fill in the blanks. And by the way, I also use the passive voice. Information gets let out, while the correct way to say it would have been the speaker leaves information out. The speaker leaves information out. So let's think this one more time for the third technique.
One standard of life as the goal of liberation. Service workers, for example, have been and continue to be undervalued because of the standard that real meaningful work comes from intellectual, not bodily work. We tell service workers that they should actually
not bodily work. Now, if you live in the United States or in the West and know anything about athletes, you probably would agree with me that athletes will tend to disagree when we talk about bodily work. And also, if you live in the United States, probably would have heard the expression, hold my beer. So here, LeBron James, for example, would say, hold my beer. And knowing how much athletes are paid in the United States or in the West in general, that would be a lot of beer to hold. So what's the third manipulation technique? It is presenting an opinion as if it is a fact. And then, especially in combination with the rapid succession, so where people don't have time to think it through, they hear your opinion as if presented as a fact, and they start treating it as a fact for further analysis, which of course you should not let your opponents do that. So here instead, if you were to analyze why service workers get paid, it would have been a longer economic analysis studying that how much other people value what you do, and is it possible for you to do something else which is more valuable, because there is something called supply and demand. And when you offer something that everyone else could offer, because whether we like it or not, it is very easy to learn how to render that type of service. And if you see that other people don't value it enough, maybe you can render similar service to somewhere else. And for example, here, the lady in the presentation, even though I'm not analyzing the whole thing, actually hints that maybe servicing only one person, in that case, your spouse, can be much more beneficial than servicing people in the Starbucks, for example. But the thing is, presenting an opinion as a fact, especially if it is a multivariable economic situation, when your opponents mention that in just one sentence and they move on to the next topic, it's something to raise your eyebrows. So, to recap, a rapid succession from topic to topic is a manipulation technique because it does not allow the listener to catch up. The other one is the use of passive voice, especially when used by news anchors and politicians when they hide the actor who did the bad deed. And every time when somebody talks, if it is in a private conversation, they start using passive voice too much, you have to stop and you have to start interrogate them, almost like somebody from a cop show. Tell me who did the thing, when and why, rather than mistakes being made. And finally, the third, last but not least, opinions presented as fact. Service workers have been underpaid because we value intellectual work more than bodily. It depends. What matters is not whether the work is intellectual or made by the body. What matters is how valuable that work is under the circumstances to those who are paying for that work. And we all know that when our toilet gets plugged and we need to call a plumber. Do we value that thing? You tell me. So if you like that video, please feel free to share, subscribe, and post a comment, because let's make this channel grow. See you in the next one.